Hi, and welcome back to the Mom Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have with us Dustin Thostenson. And we're going to talk a little bit about learn by doing, not by talking, favoring ADHD and improving interpersonal skills. But first, Dustin, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you're here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed the work that you guys are doing. Enjoyed the podcast, enjoyed the Twitter feed. Really excited to be here. So my personal mantra is understand, be understood. And it's simple, but it's really hard. And I've learned that I really need to try to listen and try to understand other people first before trying to make myself be heard or understood. And if I want to be understood, I have to try to find a good way to try to connect with people so what I'm saying or what I'm trying to communicate resonates with them. So that's probably the core thing that really drives me. My background, I've been a developer for probably a few decades now, professionally for over 2 decades. A lot of programming in there, a lot of development and in many different platforms. I've been on some amazing teams that just seem to work extremely well. And I've been on some really bad teams. I've had the environment where, we're showing up to work in a basement before the sun comes up and leaving after it goes down, and you realize that you didn't see the sun for a week. And then you see the impacts that bad teams have on people, with medical issues, the anxiety and the depression and the substance abuse issues and the family issues and suicides. And you've seen the worst that software development can have on people. And when you've been able to experience some of the best, you really want to help other people appreciate that. So the thing that really kind of drives me is to take some of the experiences that I've had in wonderful teams and help make sure that environment for other people is there so they can be their best. I don't like when they blame the seed and they say the seed is bad when the soil isn't there to support them. So that's kind of the thing that really motivates me through my career.
All right. Well, let's jump into our first topic, the learn by doing, not by talking.
Yeah, so I'm not probably one of the guests that you normally had here where they've got like that one model that they're pitching and they've got that one fix all solution. Not selling books on mobbing, but as I've learned about it, I've tried to implement it in a lot of different ways, and I found some successes with it. And I think that the doing part just seemed to work so much better. I've done coaching, technical coaching and leadership coaching at several different companies over the years. Working with teams, they want to talk, and they want to be able to kind of logically make sense of everything and review all the processes and what about all these scenarios. And I've really learned that just getting people together and doing the work seems to have such an amazing impact. The code katas have been very instrumental in that, because at least we would have a smaller experiment zone. My previous client, we would set up 2 hours a week with each team, whether it be a single 2-hour session, or some teams wanted to do it for, a half hour every morning, or 2 on whatever they wanted. But to just get people together and say, we're going to try to work this way and have it be safe, and then allow them to kind of go back in their own area and do whatever they felt they needed to, if they needed to divide and conquer, because that's how the stories were built and that's what the deadline stated, whatever. But to have some safe experiments where they got to practice some of it, I found that was pretty beneficial and just kind of seemed to become natural over time.
Nice, right on. Yeah, so I could definitely see that with Katas, because you get together, you work on a problem together. How has this learn by doing approach impacted when you join a new team or a new project? How's that philosophy impacted that?
I think again, it does break down that barrier of trying to think through all scenarios and talk through all the possibilities and try to make sure that there's not going to be any blame placed because somebody forgot to check about something. You know, I've sat in design reviews where people are arguing over the SQL for a database that hasn't even been created yet. So joining on the new teams, just getting the hands-on and arguing through the code instead of about the code seems to allow some people to release a little bit of that hesitation to say, all right, fine, we'll try it. And then once it starts working, you can, you know, change the conversation a bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've had similar experiences where, you know, it's a big kind of back and forth verbally, but you could have created an example database with both scenarios and just, you know, you would have ended the conversation a long time before. And so kind of settling these impasses can very easily be done. You know, it's like, you know, try both ideas, you know, or do both, I think is something that we practice pretty regularly because it's good for everybody to see all of those examples anyway. And then you can, you know, kind of elaborate on that. So.
Yeah. Then that's something I've been finding too is it's not always wrong to have a small discussion about that. That can be a really fruitful thing as long as the keyword's small, right? But I've also been trying like okay, let's try it, you know, before even having the discussion. It's just let's try it. And what I've found is that often if I had any concerns, they melt away or they become so obvious that you don't even have to say a whole lot. And the group is acknowledging it as it's happening. If there's some contention, it usually doesn't go away completely, but it's the people standing their ground tends to soften and melt away as you go, as more experiments are run. And so it's just been really fruitful for me. And I'm glad it has been for you as well. And I guess another area of learn by doing that jumps out to me is you had here listed reduced meetings. So how do you accomplish that, or how is that related to learn by doing for you?
Yeah, that's been another one of them too, where, you know, as we're talking through things, to change the conversation to say, you mean like this? And you start actually coding it and somebody else goes, no, like this. Those examples are good. And they get people kind of in their natural state, like writing the code and doing it. I've noticed that after we do that a little bit more, people know that we don't have to solve the problems in the meeting anymore. And there sometimes can be that decision on maybe the interface. What is it that we're really trying to accomplish here? Like, what does good look like? Sometimes you might even be able to stumble upon some BDD where, you know, they might start talking in terms of rough gherkin, where they go, okay, well, in this context, when this thing happens, then we're expecting that. So if we can do it and get to this result, we're fine. And roll back and get into the code instead of, you know, deciding which React framework is going to help us, and do we do things native, or, you know, or do we have to have composites with everything? Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So it's almost like it becomes a good meeting or a working meeting as opposed to the death by meetings, bad meeting kind of thing, right? It's one where there's healthy conflict, there's experiments being run, you're trying stuff out, you're discovering, you know, and that's I like the kind of return to, hey, meetings don't have to be a bad thing if they're done well, right? And if you turn it into the thing you're kind of talking about, maybe it's not called a meeting anymore in some people's mind, but hey, we're getting stuff done together, and it's great. Yeah, maybe that's a good tie-in to, because you know, you're talking about doing stuff together as a group, whether it's practice code or real code or trying out ideas. So how does that all play into favoring ADHD? What do you mean there?
Well, so I've never been diagnosed with ADHD myself. I graduated high school like in the middle of the 90s. So, you know, I didn't have any gray hair before I had kids. So I don't know if it's the kids or the age that brought the gray hair on. But when I was tested in high school, they kind of noticed that Dustin was having problems paying attention. And they tested and they said, no, you don't have ADHD. So they weren't giving me any medication. But I've always noticed that it's hard to focus sometimes, and especially when there's a lot of different things going on out there. And as I've recognized some of my own challenges, I've been a little bit more empathetic or in tune to the challenges that other people are having as well. So I would try to pay attention to people in conversations and stuff to see how long before they started to disconnect. And I found, like, I want to make it easy for people to disconnect and reconnect, but I also want to try to make the things small enough so you can follow through them and get to the next point, and then pull back up if you have to be at a planning level to say, okay, here's the next problem we're trying to solve, and jump into it. I don't remember who it was, but there is that concept of like I'm forgetting the name of it already. Like that visual layout where you put the thing that you're trying to do and you break it out into the different steps in Miro. And then you say, okay, here's the thing, then here's the thing, then here's the thing. And you blow all of them away when you're done. John Reed had introduced it to myself. I think that it might be a Llewellyn or Wellham thing as well. But, just those little things to say, nope, this is the one thing that we're going to focus on, and allow people to just focus the conversation there is rather helpful. And I recognize I'm giving a very long answer to explain how short and simple is good.
Yeah, there you go.
The irony here.
So what does it look like, when learning skills, or I think you kind of mentioned that attention spans are not getting longer. So you're in the work environment, you have a kind of a lot of new technical learning ahead of you. What does it mean to favor ADHD?
Are you guys on TikTok at all? Are you TikTokers?
We are not.
Have you looked at it? Have you gone out there and like scrolled through the memes?
I have I have friends that link a lot of TikToks to me. I don't particularly go out there to do those things.
I was scrolling through it the other night and it was so bam, 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 so quick. The person got slapped and the video was done as soon as the finger touched the skin. I mean, just like everything was just so quick. And I grew up in the MTV generation where, you would have like 3 scene cuts in a second, but this is even faster. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just where people's minds are.
So is that like you're writing a range, act, assert, you write your assertion, and then all of a sudden the tests run and you're off to the next test. You can't wait to look at it anymore.
Well, I mean, that fast feedback is part of it, but I think that we definitely have a generation of people coming in that are just like that more. And as much as I would love to sit and talk through the ideas of an architecture and talk about all the different scenarios of when we want to do different things, you can't. Mm-hmm. So if we're able to just break that down and say, here is the goal and here are the steps. I've got my notepad here. I write things down all the time. So every time I'm pairing or mobbing with somebody and they see that other thing, I write it down, put a little checkbox next to it, and I say, we'll get back to it.
Yeah.
Like, I promise you, we're not going to be done with this story until all the boxes are checked. But let's just keep on that one thing for now.
Yeah. We recently did that episode on the refactor, red green refactor one. And I think one thing that came up during that was the tendency to refactor while red, right? And it's like, no, stop, like let's talk about this for a second. And so tabling items for a while. But I also think that's not necessarily it's not necessarily a bad thing that things are getting smaller and smaller, as long as we have these really kind of bite-sized pieces and we're constantly building it up, because it's almost akin to an evolution over time for evolving architecture. And I think while mobbing, it's pretty rare for me to be in a very high level architectural discussion, aside from we want to try and see if these few things work, and then move on. But I also think that's probably a lot of baked in architectural experience that general design patterns are known to a few on the team, and so those kind of popcorn around, and then all of a sudden you're moving forward. So it's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, 12 factors, right? You still have to keep those things in mind. And as you're building things, does it still adhere to those rules? I'm looking here, I've got, one of my sets of headphones. I look back over the last 15 years and realize I have spent a small fortune on headphones, a lot of headphones for noise canceling. And I did that because I had these huge maps in my head that I'd have to create. I felt like I was walking through Times Square, and I had to remember how to go from the 9th floor of this building in the northwest corner across Times Square to the 4th floor of this building. And I had to just remember all of these things with the complex architecture. And then, when my wife would tap me on the shoulder to open up a jar, it would just all come crumbling down. So I would fight to try to keep that mental model in my head. And I'd blast music that made me go more deaf, to, try to clear out all the noises and to just try to keep myself in the zone. And I thought, I'm fighting so hard to work with this complex arena instead of just saying, but what if?
Yeah.
What if I made things really simple that I could put it down and pick it up and, maybe even come to work the next day with a small failing test that I go, okay, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, a lot of, I've been exactly where you're talking about. Recently, we were, in my current mob, we are dealing with, at least in my experience, very complex data transfer scenarios from all these different systems. And basically, we were coming into an existing system that, in my experience, had some fragility in that if one part of the house of cards didn't happen just right, it's like the whole thing came crashing down, right? And it'd be a problem for a customer, right? And it was so hard. So I think at first we were just talking through it and getting lost. And then we started to try to write it down. We were lost and we started to draw it. And that was good because it was it's there, but it was so hard. And then I think the big light bulb moment came when we started to automate the tests for certain parts of it, like nice little fast tests, such that it was I don't have to keep it all in my head. I don't even need to understand this giant diagram. There are little robots running, making sure each part is right. And if anything's wrong, it'll tell me the exact part that's wrong, right? And so, and so what this, I'm glad you brought up this topic because it's maybe a subsection of a much broader topic for me in regards to what I guess I'm calling the coaching paradox. So maybe this is the coaching paradox with focus and attention, right? And so I think the paradox is in general that, hey, it's good to learn to do hard things.
Yeah.
It's good to learn that self-discipline, right? And that ability to, and to be stretching yourself to be able to think deeper, understand more, take the next step. But it's also, you want to make things easy for people, right? And so I feel the same paradox is maybe going on here with attention, where yes, you want to make it easy as possible to for a team, a person, a mob to stay focused on the task. But also, if we make it too easy, do they then lack the skills to have focus once they're outside of this pristine, perfect environment, assuming it is pristine and perfect. And so, what are your thoughts there? Yeah. How do you balance both ends possibly?
so that just kind of triggered a thought, and I'm going to take a sharp left turn here.
Good.
But recently I started to create a presentation called Lazy, Good and Bad. And it's kind of a spin-off of Thinking Fast and Slow. If you've read that book, I know that, and I've been reading a lot of books on psychology, so I'm kind of thinking about the system one brain, the slow brain, and our cognitive brain, and the interplay between them, and all the things that organizations do to try to help out people who are just naturally lazy. Like, humans are lazy. That's just who we are. Our biology is built to be lazy because we can't process everything. Our eyes can't process everything that they see. So they just take a little bit and put enough together to tell us the story and allow us to move on our day, right? Avoid the threats and everything else. And I think about software developers, like it's good to have a lazy software developer because they will automate the process that they don't want it to do. That's good. But on the other hand, companies will look at, well, we want to make it easy for developers to be lazy. So we'll have a DevOps team build out all of the pipelines. So all they have to do is just add a couple of properties and methods, and the system will just work, right? We've seen the matrix. If you just put a couple of properties and methods here, the framework will take care of all of it. Maybe we rub a little code generation on there, and everything is going to work. Thank God for reflection. And those things are great until a point where it doesn't work. And then the person who's using it has no recourse. They have to wait to talk to the smart person who built the system because they're just a dummy using it. And maybe they didn't, have the properties set right. So there's that really interesting balance between doing something that you understand to make it easier for yourself so you can be lazy, where somebody else is trying to impose laziness upon you without that ability to solve the problems or to even improve the system because it's outside of your control.
I've got to be careful about inflicting laziness on other people.
I like that. I'm writing it down.
Yeah, and that's kind of a quality I think that I've developers that are proactively lazy, right, versus not lazy at all, like that work hard. And so I call the automation of the small tasks proactive laziness, in the sense that it's like, kind of a focus on the dry principle, right? And so it's just never repeat something that you've done like one or two times, right? And so, but that's pretty interesting because yeah, there's a chain of side effects that happen with, making the whole system lazy, right? And especially if there is an absence of understanding. So that kind of relates to that idea of, laziness being a focus can also adversely affect the system, right?
Yeah. And the world's nuanced, right? It's that's why a lot of things often are proverbs or principles that have general rules with exceptions and that kind of thing. Because if you think about it, like the act of automating something is itself hard, right? So and so if you take it too strictly, you would never automate anything because you're too lazy to automate it, right? And so it's like nuanced selective laziness is what you're going for, I suppose, right? And I guess I think in terms of where you were going, Dustin, earlier with attention, so there is this good allergic reaction to too much work in progress and too much cognitive load, right? Because that's like almost like a good kind of laziness, right? Because if you try to just grin and bear it and just like take, Atlas and put the world on your back and try to move it, maybe you're growing your skill to do hard things, but the side effects of the side effects is you're generating a bigger batches, larger things in progress, more stress, more things in your head. And like, so to favor ADD in that sense seems really good, right? Because you're like, okay, you do the hard thing to which is break it down into smaller pieces, whether that's code, whether that's Kanban, whether that's drawings or whatever. You do a hard thing to make it easier in the short term and midterm, right? And so as opposed to just doing the hard thing, pushing it up the hill. So it's very nuanced. And so one thing you had here that I'd be interested about is you noticed that this was more important in the developmental stage. Do you mind expounding more on that?
The necessary for laziness and for focus. Can't remember. I'm thinking at that point I meant like the developmental stage as far as like for the individuals, like for some of the newer developers coming in.
Right.
Yeah. I got kids in college now, and I'm hearing the conversations again about like the weed out courses, the courses that are unintentionally hard to get rid of the cruft. And and I hate that idea. I absolutely hate the idea that we're trying to keep people out of the industry, and trying to like weed them out early, or even when they get into jobs, put them into situations that that are difficult for even the most experienced people. And I guess for me, I was on a team at one point where I realized I had more aggregate years of experience than like the entire team of a dozen developers. And that made me feel a little bit old, but a lot of them were in that 3 to 18 month period. And as they would confide in me, they felt stupid, they felt bad, they felt like they didn't belong.
Mm.
And that wasn't true. You know, when I was able to help them focus on a simple problem to solve, or scope it down, they would do really well.
Mhm.
But they would see some of the other people just rambling on about all the other different types of things, and they go, well, why can't I think all of them? You don't need to. Just focus on this type of thing, and get, you know, like Woody says, you know, turn up the good, find your own successes. It was interesting when people would find that, they would feel good about that and they would keep building on it. But when you would expect them to compensate for the lack of leadership and
Mhm.
organizational focus, then they would naturally blame themselves, or the people who were leading would blame them. And it's just so unhealthy and so unnecessary. And we're losing really good people out of the industry when we need so many more. There
Mm.
is no stop to the appetite for good software.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think we need it, so we don't want to thin the herd, so to speak, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
one thing that jumps to mind for me with this is I like your example of the weed out classes, right? And I feel like I've seen two versions of that. There's the bad version where if you kind of return to it's shown up in history in several different forms, but I like Willem's phrasing of it with the fluent edge versus like going beyond that to like frustration zone. And then if you're not in the fluent edge of learning, you're like bored, right? And so
Yeah.
I think the negative version of the weed out class is it's just complete overwhelmed, way into the frustration zone, and they're just like, deal with it. You're
Mhm.
going like 10 steps above where somebody is, and there's no attempt for accessibility. There's no attempt for, hey, here's the next step to, you know, step 1, 2, and 3 to, you know, and in a few months we'll get to 10, and, you know, here's someone to guide you and help you in that kind of thing. And I have seen the good version of those where it's a challenging class, but there's a very well laid out path for here's time and places for people to help you get the next step to get there. You know, this is challenging, but you know, this is hard, but we're here to help, and here are the ways to get there. And there's an accessibility to that fluent edge through a challenging you know, adventure. And so I think you're right. So if someone's in the development stage, new into the career, we don't want to make them bored. We want to
Mhm.
challenge them, but we want to give them tools to succeed while they do so. Yeah, right on. Yeah, and I guess this might be a good time to jump to the next topic, which is improving interpersonal skills. So what's been your experience here?
Yeah, for and I think that this kind of applies with, you know, pairing, mobbing, whatever, just working with other people. Um, you guys had talked previously, I think it was with Claire, where you had shared one of the models where you have somebody solve a problem first,
Mhm.
and then they will solve it again with a group where they can articulate it.
Mhm.
And I found that I like that idea a lot, because I found that a lot of the issues that people will have with working in groups are because they learned technology.
Mm.
They learned code. Like, that's the thing that they focus on. You wouldn't want to buy a car from a mechanic because they're going to tell you about the spark plugs and the horsepower and the compressions and all that type of stuff. And you might just want to know, where do I push the button to start it? And how do I make it go? How do I make it stop? And where do I put my cups? You know, so sometimes the level of conversation can be a little bit different depending on the audience,
Yeah.
or the ability to articulate your thoughts when you're doing these things that are just muscle memory and natural.
Mm.
I find are really, really interesting, where some of the katas can help with that,
Yeah.
especially if you do the same one a couple of times. Go ahead.
that example came from our interview process. So we would get people more, later in their career that would that had no experience mobbing, right? So they had lots of experience with code, but no experience mobbing, and then they come in and I think that in many cases that there was this kind of feeling that they've never had to say out loud what they were doing before. Uh, and so, so as kind of a soft ramp up, it's like, just write this, and they have no problem doing it. And then it's like, okay, now tell somebody else to write it. It's just to get them into that mode of thinking that way. And often that's been a a nice little communication ramp up that people need, because rather than getting flustered on kind of the first difficult problem. And so it's kind of an interesting thing, but I think gradually over time we've found these little techniques to kind of bring people into that mode of verbalizing code, which has helped them kind of build on top of those past things. And that's not even considering the interpersonal difficulties that can come up between people in general, right?
Well, and as an industry for software developers, a lot of us got into this because we didn't have to deal with people, because maybe that wasn't our strengths. I've got to work with a lot of developers, and I found a lot of people who are, at various points on the spectrum. And one of them had gotten a promotion, and we were congratulating him, and he said, and I'm not going to try to do his impression but in a very monotone, straight-faced voice, he said, "Thank you. I didn't know what was going on. I can't read people's reactions. When my manager brought me into the room, I didn't know if I was getting fired or promoted." And I've learned that from some other people as well, where Ryan Bergman, Ryber on Twitter, had shared something one time where he had kind of shared some of his own struggles. And he goes, "I can't always read people, so I've learned some tricks. I ask them how they're feeling, and then when they tell me, I believe them."
Yeah.
So there's just, there's that whole spectrum, and, that communication can either be in the area of how can I communicate my thoughts, my intention, the code that we're writing, and then also, focusing on the interpersonal communication on the teams. And it's hard. It's absolutely hard. And I can definitely understand why people will want to get away from that stuff, especially if they're not prepared for that, if they don't have any practice, if they don't have any experience in it. It's a distraction, and sometimes people would rather just write the code and locally optimize, right? Stay in the zone that they're most comfortable in. And it might not be the best thing for the team or for the organization, but it sure feels good right here, and that's what we want to stick with.
Yeah. And kind of returning to what you were saying earlier with the katas, where it's such a great place to start for a team, and what Chris was talking about with the interview scenario, that is such a great icebreaker, right? Because because some people are like, why would you do FizzBuzz kata again? Like, what's the point? It's so simple. Exactly, right? So if we take everything in the system and make it so simple, except the interpersonal interactions, right? Then you're right on that fluent edge for learning that skill, whether it's as simple as verbalizing your code. So like what you were saying before is, I think people probably have a lot of practice thinking to themselves at a low to moderate level, and then at a high level, speaking to others. So I'm at a status meeting. Oh, I've worked on, there's A, B, and C to do. I've done A, you know what I mean? Like, that's very different communication skill than I'm struggling to think through a problem. Here's where I'm at right now. Here's my current stream of consciousness. I think I'm going towards A, and the next step kind of looks like this. What do you think? Like that's a totally different interpersonal skill that kind of opens the door for collaboration and that kind of feedback. And what's great about those katas is it really simplifies that, and people see how obvious. I love that quote you gave where it was like, I ask people how they're feeling and I believe it, right? And so it gives a really concrete example of, oh, I said to create a function and someone created a function,
Yeah.
And I said why I was thinking to do it, and they understood. And it goes back to what you're saying before. It's really accessible ways to understand and be understood. And I like what I think it was Mike Clement said before. that if you're so used to communicating in code, it's almost easier to communicate it in code and then understand each other afterwards. And so it's a great bridge to building those interpersonal skills, because you start with things you know, right? And then you branch out. And I think it's really interesting thing, the whole, I wrote code to be away from people. And so unless you're a superstar who can create an entire system, or you're making a really system, you eventually don't get away from people. You're just turning it into asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
And that has its own challenges. What are ways you have broken the ice with people who are more resistant to joining that first kata, or it's just like, oh, it's not for me, or how do you generally approach things like that?
I've run into some scenarios where I would run into tech leads who are neither technical nor leaders, and they would push back on joining the katas because they realized that they would be exposed. And they go, oh no, you can do that with my developers, right? Just you let the developers do that thing, and we'd get in and we would do FizzBuzz. And they would struggle with that because they didn't really have it. So it was kind of that protective mechanism that they would put up there. But sometimes I would say, well, I mean, if you're the leader, you should be able to model those behaviors and show your team how to do this stuff right. Usually the conversations work better in private, where you're able to kind of enable them to still be confident and the leader if they need to be. But you can't force it, you can't coerce it. You get the people in there and you turn up the good. And as other people see it working, they lean on it more. But your FizzBuzz example was great. It reminds me of the original Karate Kid movie, wax on, wax off. Yeah. It's not about the waxing. Like the thing that you're doing, it's not about that. It's not about the FizzBuzz. It's not about the method. It's about the thing that goes into building the method. And I go, oh, and that happens so often. The thing that you're focused on, you're not focused on the right thing. It's the other thing.
And regarding katas, I think some really cool things that I've seen with Willem's mob programming RPG is that you can't progress until you focus on the more interpersonal stuff as well through that. And so it's still a kata, but it significantly draws focus away from the code, but you're still working on code. And it's a pretty interesting effect, because I've seen groups of people playing the game and they realize like, oh, it's about filtering out the ideas and boiling it down to one and communicating. So the conversation ends up going away from what should happen in FizzBuzz to how should we be interacting. And so I thought that was a really cool effect on it.
Nice.
I was fortunate enough to work with Willem at a previous client for a little bit. We had some overlap in the same area, and it was fun to watch him and one other person take a team out and say, okay, we're gonna have our team just doing it, right? We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about how we're doing all the things, how we're setting up the Kanban board. We're just going to jump in and do it. And it is like, that is the best approach, to just jump in and do it. And the teams did really well, right up until the point where leaders had to flex their power and slowly started cherry picking people and decimating the team and breaking it. And it's hard. It's hard to still lean into those things, to say, even if we're doing it well, you still have to have the environment which supports it. And it's such a brittle process.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's almost like wherever I'm at, I've never been at a place that's reached ideal perfection utopia. There's no such place. There's always room for improvement. There's always things you notice that could be better. There's always problems. And it's just, where are you at on whatever curve, right? And so, but no matter where you're at, it's always, okay, where are we? What would be the next best thing, on the one thing on the Kanban to try to take us to the next step, right? And so, even worst of the worst, moderate, best of the best, there's always, okay, we're here. Where's the next step, right? And so just trying to create that little micro environment, even if it's just you and one other person.
We had a friend join our team one time, and we tried the whole least qualified implementer and we were shifting our data center to AWS Europe. And this was the day, like we'd been working on that. We had AWS US set up. We had migrated everything over. Now we want to run in Europe. And when Mike came in on his first day, I said, hey, Mike, you know how it's a great environment if you can write code and push it to production on your first day? And he goes, great, we're pushing code to prod. And I said, no, we're pushing prod.
Moving it over.
I said, yeah, today we're launching it, right? We've done all of the work. We've set up our web services to be able to look for the data in AWS Europe, and if it's there, it'll use it. Otherwise, it won't. All we need to do is just spin everything up and start ingesting the data. And he was like, well, I don't know what to do. And I said, okay, great. Well, here's the big green button you push. He goes, well, what if something goes wrong? I said, here are the TVs. They green good, red bad. And he's like, well, what if we need more data? I said, you're on the email group, so you'll get it and you can go to that website locally and you can click into it. And sure enough, he pushed the button and everything starts growing. Jobs are being built. We had a whole Jenkinception there where we're creating Jenkins and all the fun stuff. And then all of a sudden, red. And we're like, oh, crap. And on his first day, he was able to go through and he goes, it says here, you're missing a firewall port and we need to call these people. And sure enough, that was the one part that was not automated, another team. And they gave us the whole, you got to submit a ticket on the third Thursday of the odd month and all that. And, we were able to come back and say, no, we did it. You just screwed it up like you had screwed up previously. And then it was a pause and they go, try it again. And I didn't really reflect on that. Like that was just logical for us at the point. It wasn't until months later that I reflected. I was like, that was really cool.
Yeah.
And we weren't bragging about it at the time either. We were just thinking, yeah, there are a couple of things that were kind of stucky about that. What could we do better? And that was, to your point, right? Long story to your point.
Good story.
It is. It's just like, well, but what else could we have done? Like, what else could we make this better with a little bit of investment? So, maybe the person who's kicking it off isn't a senior developer with 20 years experience. Maybe it's somebody with 5 years or 5 months of experience who goes, well, this obviously is telling us the problem. Have we tried here?
Nice. Right on. Yeah.
Which is completely different from like automation for test coverage purposes. It's no.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed those CD moments where you deploy and it goes well or it doesn't go well, right? Because either way you learn a ton and it's always fun. And it causes a lot of light bulb moments. Well, we can keep going on, but we are starting to hit our time box, Dustin, but it's been fantastic having you on the show. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to share or plug before we close?
I've got a couple of different user groups that I'll be speaking at. We've got Seattle Code Crafters coming up and DevOps Day Des Moines, if anybody's going to be in those areas. That conference online as well. And I'm going to be the chair for the Agile Online Summit for the sustainability track. And if anybody is interested in pitching presentations for that, I think that we're having a call for speakers soon. And I believe that we're looking at very early November for that conference. So if people are interested in that, please reach out. Would love to keep bringing in fresh ideas and learning from other people.
All right.
Fantastic. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. As with my previous conversations with you before, Dustin, I learned so much. So thank you for joining us today. It was a great time. So to our audience, what's your opinions? Where have you seen learning by doing work well? Where has it not worked well? Where have you seen favoring ADHD work well and not work well? We'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your opinions on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and more. And if you'd like to share this episode with somebody who's considering learning more by doing or thinking about how to improve the interpersonal skills of his team and like subjects, please share this with them. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And until next time, mahalo everyone and have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everyone.